Chapter 19. The two continued their walk. Before long, they had arrived at the gates of the castle. However, Hannah sensed something was not right. No guards or knights were in the bailey or standing watch at the entrance. From the alert sent out earlier, the least Hannah expected was a small force of resistance as they arrived. But to see no one at all was not only strange, but suspicious. Someone was there. Someone had to be there. And then she felt it, a piercing sensation like a dagger held to her forehead. Not one meant to kill, but one that barely grazes the skin, a trickle of blood the only physical injury, an anxious, helpless mental state the greater of the wounds. It was a psychological tactic, and Hannah was the victim. She could feel the eyes of the hunter watch the two of them. The image of the one watching appeared in her mind. His emerald cloak and silver hair were to Hannah associated with fear, with someone she should avoid at all costs. No, Hannah thought. I've come this far. I won't let some arrogant bully scare me away. Not any more. We know you're there, Hannah mumbled, attempting an authoritative tone but falling short. A rush of wind and upcurrent of dirt occurred directly in front of Hannah. She leaned back but refused to move her feet. She had to prove she wasn't afraid. She was in control. Hexfer stood opposite her, the wide, deceitful smile ever present. He leaned in, his face only inches from Hannah's. Despite a racing heart and erratic butterflies, Hannah stood frozen, her eyes displaying her conviction. You've grown up. Hexfer looked Hannah up and down and added, However, I don't believe your husband will be pleased to see you in another man's cloak. Hannah ignored his comment. What are you doing here? Hannah asked, her voice demanding an answer. Hexfer took a few steps away from Hannah and peered up at the castle. Seer carefully watched Hexfer, ready to jump if he tried anything. I don't see a point in lying to you, your majesty. The royal advisor asked me, the chairman of the guild for the rights of oppressed sorcerers, to come by, negotiate, discuss terms of this amendment in hopes that we can collaborate for the greater good, right? You say greater good, but what you mean is a deal that would benefit the two of you. Only the two of you, she retorted with an obvious frustration. You're no longer a part of the guild. Don't feel you have any place to complain about what I do for our people. Our people? You have only ever cared about your own well-being. You display your power to frighten others into respecting you. Perhaps if I had a worthy adversary, I wouldn't be so bored as to play with others' lives. You know me, Seer. You've known me for a long time. I enjoy challenges. When this no longer interests me, I'll move on. However, Hexfer expressed a chilling smile, glancing at Hannah. The royal advisor has offered me an interesting proposition. You see, he's willing to withdraw the amendment on the table in the United Court, which means matters won't get worse. Granted, they also won't get better. Hannah took a deep breath. She felt his hostility, his bloodlust. She knew what he meant when he said negotiations, but the thought no longer shocked her. She assumed it should be of no surprise to wear a target on her head as a queen. He wants you to kill me, Hannah calmly said, with no shock in her voice. Hexfer shared a smile. Seer tensed, his amber eyes increasingly focused on Hexfer. Yes, Hexfer confirmed, with amusement in his voice. Yes, but what the royal advisor does not understand is that I'm not as unintelligent, uninformed, or inflexible as he seems to think. Therefore, I have a proposition for you, your majesty. I'm listening, Hannah coolly said. However, in her head, she was confused and suspicious. Why would the emerald sorcerer wish to work with her? Unlike the desires of the royal advisor, I don't wish you dead. Quite the opposite, actually. I believe it would be mutually beneficial for us to work together. Don't do it, Hannah, Seer interrupted, his eyes unmoving from their focus on Hexfer. He can't be trusted. Seer, it's been years since our little feud. Don't you think it's time to move on? Hannah? On what terms? Hannah asked. She understood Seer had her best interests at heart, but she was curious. She wanted to hear what Hexfer had to say. After all, he could have killed her on multiple occasions, but hadn't. Not that his lack of action made her trust him, but she felt, despite his uncaring nature, that Hexfer would stay true to his word. Hexfer smiled at her response, Seer biting his lip to allow Hannah the chance to exercise her diplomacy skills. I think we'll both agree the first step is to remove the current royal advisor from his position. He'll only be a hindrance to our work and prevent progress. I assure you can convince the king of that." "What else?" Hannah asked, trying to control her voice from shaking. "I, the president of the Guild for the Rights of Oppressed Sorcerers, will negotiate directly with you, Queen of Wyvernon, on any amendment or law created in the United Court. This will guarantee that sorcerers will have a say in legislation and diminish any tensions between the groups." "Hannah," Seer began in a deep, calm tone before being interrupted. "Accept these initial conditions, and I believe we'll go far together, Your Majesty," Hexfer said, bowing his head to Hannah. Hannah stared at Hexfer, trying to catch any deception. However, the term seemed not only appropriate, but along the lines of what Hannah wanted to accomplish anyways. She knew her inexperience in diplomacy may have to do with being so easily persuaded by Hexfer, but she could not comprehend Seer's disdain. "I want to see my family," Hannah whispered. "That's all I want right now. I promise we can negotiate at a later time. I accept your initial conditions as is. I accept your proposition. Now please, allow me to pass. I want to see my family." Hexfer lifted his head. His smile had disappeared, replaced by a solemn and spiteful expression. Seer stepped forward, becoming a barrier between the two of them. "She accepted your terms, as said. No more negotiating tonight. Let us through." The two glared at one another. After a moment, Hexfer shook his head and scoffed. "Just as I thought. She doesn't care about anyone but herself. Selfish, arrogant royals. They'll say anything to get by, but won't admit to any terms, even when they've previously agreed to it. Twist some arms, stab some backs. I bet your Majesty doesn't even know what she's just agreed to," Hexfer infuriatingly yelled. "Hexfer, no one simply accepts terms without give and take. It's completely one-sided, and she just agrees? No one in the castle, no one in all of Wyvernon would allow for such terms. Hexfer," Seer began in a soothing tone, all hostility gone. "Sometimes simple is nice. Sometimes simple is the best some people have to offer." He glanced at Hannah, whose empty eyes signified her exit from the conversation long before. Hannah was thinking about her parents and brother, all of whom were within the castle. As long as the royal advisor was there, the three of them were at risk. Perhaps even Nina was in danger. Seer grinned and continued, "And sometimes it's the simple things that make all the difference, and we don't notice until they're gone. Like a light in a lamppost. With it, the world continues as normal, every path lit. But without it, extra effort must be exerted by all who must pass from one light to the next, the dark spaces in between creating a frightening shadow. It may not seem like much when at work, but without it, the simple things, life and the world itself would be much too complicated. Now, if you will, let us pass." "I'll never admit to agreeing with you," Hexfer stated, a smile spreading across his face. He sighed and stepped out of the way of the entrance, leaning against the stone wall. "So I'll just stay silent. For now." The moment Hexfer moved, Hannah returned to reality from her thoughts and ran past, the ruby cloak blazing like fire behind her. Seer nodded to Hexfer and followed Hannah. Hannah felt her heart race, the butterflies springing to life. The nervousness and pit in her stomach returned with a vengeance. The emerald fog clouding her mind vanished, and the intimidating, ominous shadow of the royal advisor took its place. She felt the darkness swallow her as she ran, as if she was running in place, never to arrive by the side of her family. The force pulled at her, and Hannah fought back, causing her to fall to the ground, the hard, cold stone under her fingers. Hannah felt the pain from the scrapes, not wanting to look in case she bled out. "Hannah, are you all right?" Seer asked as he ran to her. He knelt down beside her to help her sit up. "The cloak, it got caught on the handle of the front door as you ran, pulling you back." "Oh," Hannah responded, relieved by this statement. "I thought I was going insane." "Not yet," Seer replied. The two shared a smile and stood. Hannah brushed off her dress. When she was ready, the two continued their journey to the throne room, where they knew the others would be. As they turned down the hallway, they noticed two guards standing outside the door on high alert. They heard the footsteps and twisted their necks to see Seer and Hannah. A look of shock and confusion covered their faces, as they had not been prepared for such a thing to happen. Seer paused, but Hannah took a deep breath and kept walking. Once in front of the guards, she recognized the one. She had danced with him on the night of the ball. The butterflies fluttered, and she cleared her throat. "Please step aside so we may pass," Hannah softly ordered, her tone unconvincing, so much so the guards glanced at one another and did not move. "We can't do that, Your Highness," one of the guards said, his voice shaking out of fear of denying entry to the Queen. However, his fear would be greater if the royal advisor knew they had allowed her to slip through without putting up a fight. Hannah wasn't surprised. After all, not many, if anyone at all, within the walls of the castle would trust a sorcerer. "I demand entrance," Hannah stated, her voice more authoritative than before. "We can't. I am your queen, and I—" There came a knock on the door behind him. The four stared at the door for a few seconds before stepping away, the guards opening it. One of the prince's top knights appeared in the opening. As Hannah looked past him, she saw her parents and Van kneeling before the throne, knights holding swords to their heads. The king sat on his throne, Nina, the royal advisor, and the others of the royal court standing next to him. The king appeared depressed, even as he looked up at Hannah. His blue eyes glimmered, his frustration at his powerlessness as king caused a suffering within him he was unaccustomed to. The royal advisor didn't appear surprised with Hannah's entrance, and his unamused glare sent a chill down her spine. The butterflies started up. Hannah felt her entire body beginning to quake. There was absolute silence in the throne room. Hannah's heart pounded, but it was muted, as if she were falling from reality, a slow fade. First sound would disappear, then her vision, and then the entire world around her would slowly sink until they were no more. There was a time when Hannah believed she may never see her family again. She had given up. However, the flame within her flickered. It wouldn't extinguish. Not this time. Hannah took a few steps forward and took a deep breath. "Things can't continue like this," Hannah murmured. The king's eyes widened, the royal advisor's eyes doing the opposite. Hannah's head sharply turned to the royal advisor and returned the icy glare. "This is not your kingdom, nor will it ever be. Your days of manipulation and dishonesty are over. As queen, I'll be sure of that." "Don't be so sure," the royal advisor said in a serious voice. "King Daedalus, I'm your queen, right?" Hannah cautiously took 2 steps forward, but stopped when she noticed the knights tighten their grip on their weapons. Van and her mother flinched, but her father remained calm and unmoving. His eyes were closed, his teeth gritted in frustration. Inside, Hannah felt like breaking down and crying. She felt like running away, leaving the situation for someone else to deal with, like she did when faced with Hexfer and Seer, when the butterflies and anxiety returned, when her breath was taken away and her heart attempted to escape. She felt as if she were stepping backwards, or perhaps she continued to run forward, but the speed she was running was not fast enough to keep pace with the world around her. "No," Hannah thought. "I gave up on running long ago. There was no point in running into an abyss. Darkness is all that awaited me there. So I stood still and watched everyone pass me by. Maybe I was waiting for something or someone. But I wanted him to return so he could see where I was going. So when he returned next, he could find me." Hannah's eyes drifted to her father. His image shifted between that of the Reaper and the one Hannah knew as her father. As the hope in Hannah started to fade, she was hit with a rush of wind and heat. Like flames engulfed her, Hannah felt the fiery, amber eyes of the one person who had trusted and believed in her since their first meeting. "Ease up," the deep voice sang to her as her mind danced in the darkness. A light began to take form in the distance. She reached out her hand, but it was too far away. "I have to run to it," Hannah realized. The butterflies fluttered, however, as they took flight, their pattern was calming. They danced. Hannah understood and ran. "There you go." Hannah returned to reality, a newfound strength blazing within her. The air in the room seemed to change, everyone's expressions transforming with it. Her head twisted toward the 3 knights holding swords to her family. "I order you to put your weapons down," Hannah demanded, her authoritative tone enough to paralyze anyone. The king's head perked up, shocked by her ability, perhaps seeing her as the true queen for the first time. The knights obeyed her order and sheathed their swords. Hannah's eyes began to water as her eyes met her mother's. Her powerful aura from earlier silently diminished due to diverting her attention. However, her mother's serious expression reminded her of the situation. Hannah straightened up and held her head high. "King Daedalus," Hannah said. As her eyes connected with his, she felt the nervous butterflies return, and a smile spread across her face. The hostile and ominous environment from before was gone. The tides had turned. Hannah was taking control from the royal advisor. "This is your kingdom, is it not?" A charming smile broke through his shocked expression. "Yes," the king replied. The royal advisor's eyes made evident his irritation and fear. His breathing grew rapid, but he could think of nothing to say. He had pushed his limitations and boundaries, seeing how far he could go, and, unfortunate for him, broke the pillar he was climbing to the top of. He hadn't even realized the king had stepped onto another pillar, and beside him stood Hannah. "And I am your queen?" Hannah asked, as if she and the king were the only ones there. Her voice cracked, and her eyes started to water. Her heart raced, but her eyes did not leave the king's. "Yes, forever and always." Hannah noticed Nina tremble in her peripheral vision. It hurt Hannah to ignore her, but she had realized she must prioritize the moment for something that will impact the entirety of Wyvernon, not to mention Hexfer's deal she had agreed to. "Daedalus, I am sorry," Hannah began, her voice not able to properly regain the authoritative tone. Hannah's head turned, and her eyes pierced the royal advisor. Her hand rose to point at him. "This man will be doomed to exile for the death of the late king of Wyvernon." A loud gasp was heard among all who worked at the castle. The king's eyes grew wide. "Guards, seize him," Hannah ordered. The 3 knights who had previously held their swords to her family confusedly walked to the royal advisor and cautiously restrained his arms. The royal advisor did not fight back. He knew he had lost. More so, he was shocked at his sentence. Not death, but exile. "There are things worse than death, but I'm sure you'll soon discover that when you are sent outside the walls of Wyvernon. In honesty, I know a few who would enjoy revenge against the oppressive royal advisor. Take him to the dungeons for now, if you will." This line caused a chill to run down his spine, a slight struggle as the knights removed him from the throne room. When the door shut behind them, Hannah felt the tether holding her back cut loose. She ran for her family and embraced them in her arms. The king walked down from his throne and stood next to the reunited family for a few moments. When Hannah saw him there, her arms changed direction and she lunged for him. She felt guilty about resurfacing his pain concerning his father, knowing it was the royal advisor more than likely heavily weighing on his mind. But now there was time to heal. The king brought up his hand and slowly ran his fingers down her cheek. When their lips met, Hannah felt the warming sensation course through her veins, and the butterflies danced again. As he pulled away, Hannah gazed at Nina in the background, standing frozen in place. She walked over to Nina and lifted her head. Nina and Hannah looked into each other's eyes for the first time in what Hannah deemed too long to be without her best friend. Hannah felt the tears starting up once more and quickly wrapped her arms around Nina, who began bawling in turn. "Nina," Hannah whispered in her old friend's ear, "I want you to go home. Go back to your family." Hannah pulled away and saw Nina's devastated face, Hannah's own expression serious and blank. "If you ever come near the castle without an invitation or prior engagement, you'll have to face the royal court once more, and next time, they may not be as easy on you." Hannah stepped back, her distance between Nina growing with each step. "Go home, Nina." Nina shook her head in disbelief, her eyes watering with sadness, anger, and frustration. She turned and dramatically exited the throne room. Seer, who still stood near the door, watched the reunion with a light heart. However, he felt something heavy tugging at him. He opened his mouth to announce his departure, but quickly decided against it. As he turned to leave, Hannah raced up to him. "Wait," she said, a smile spreading across her face. She took off his ruby cloak and handed it back to him. "Thank you for everything." Seer accepted his cloak and held it in his arm. He bowed to Hannah. "I only live to serve, Your Majesty," Seer responded. He felt a weight on his shoulder, causing his eyes to widen. As he rose from his bow, he saw Hannah's smiling face. "It's Hannah." "I'm sorry, Hannah." The two let out a short laugh, and their eyes met. "Be careful in the future. Hexfer is complicated. I know. Not everything in life is going to be simple. I should go, Seer said, and bowed his head. He turned his body and bowed in the direction of Hannah's family and the king, and then walked from the throne room, Hannah watching after him all the while. As her eyes followed him, she noticed the vibrant red glow of his ring and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered as the door closed behind him. This has been Light from a Broken Lamp by M.A.Morales. Thank you for listening.